Okay, we are on Chaf Amud Aleph, about 11 lines from the top. We are 20A1, the second column, the second paragraph. So Machlokas, so Tani Kamei Rav Yitzchak bar Abba. A Tana mentioned in front of Rav Yitzchak bar Abba. V'akrivas olav yasak hamishpat. That is in Shmini, I believe. He brought the Ola and he did it according to its law. So what was the law? So this is about the Korban on the eighth day of the Miluim. Aaron did the Korban according to the Mishpat. So the Tana said that Kamishpat Olas Nedava, according to the law of a voluntary burnt burnt offering. Limed al olas chova shetuna smicha. We learn from here that an obligatory ola needs smicha to be leaned on. So we said Rashi in the Mishnah said that the problem in that you have to lean down with all your might, and just like you're not allowed to ride an animal on Yantif, you can't do smicha on Yantif. But we're learning from, but that's in regard to Yantif. So this specific Mishnah Tana or Brisa was not specifically about Yantif, but it's teaching us that an obligatory chova, obligatory ola needs smicha. So Rashi says, what was the mishpat? So the only mishpat laws that we had so far was for a donated ola in Parshas Vayikra, because that's where all the laws of the Korban Ola and the Korban Shlamim are brought. And the person there says, V'samach yado. So you have to do smicha, so too, this also needs a smicha. So an obligatory Ola, said this Tana, also needs smicha. So Tosos doesn't like Rashi's explanation. This is talking about, I mean, it's true, Vayekrevas Ola is definitely talking about the eighth day of the Miluim. So Rashi says it's talking about the Ola of Aaron, and he was commanded to bring it, so it was obligatory, it wasn't voluntary. But Tosos feels, and this Tosos has a bunch of discussions about this, is that that these korbanos that we're talking about that need smicha are obligatory offerings. A communal offering, not just an ola or an obligatory ola, but a communal ola. Okay, just keep that in mind. Okay, Amar Le, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba told the Tana, the Amar L'chamani, who are you saying according to? I mean, who is this brisa that you're mentioning it? Who's the Tana that it accords with? Beis Shami, he that only follows Beis Shami. Dlogam Rishon Rechova Misham Nedava. He doesn't learn the laws of obligatory shlamim from voluntary korban shlamim. So again, so korban shlamim are peace offerings. Peace offerings. I mean, shlamim means peace, and the kohen and the giver get to eat from a korban shlamim. A korban ola, no one gets to eat from it. Just we have to remember that. So just like Beis Shammai doesn't learn Shamich Shlamim, so but he does learn Korban Ola, this obligatory Ola from a voluntary Ola. To turn to 28:2, the Beis Hillel, because if this brisa would have followed Beis Hillel, Kaven de Gamri Shamechova Misham Nedava, since they already learned the laws of obligatory Korban Shlamim from voluntary donated Korban Shlamim, Olas Chova Nami Lo Ikra. They don't need a drasha, they don't need a pasuk to tell us that an Olas Chova, an obligatory Ola, also needs smicha. De Gamri Olas Nedava, because they could learn it from an Olas Nedava. So this brisa has to be according to Beis Shammai. So then the Gemara says, "When we might debate Hillel Shammai Chova Mishama Nidava Gamra." Who said, or how do we know that Beis Hillel learns that obligatory shlamim needs smicha from a voluntary shlamim. Dilma me alas chova gamri. Maybe they need this drasha first, and they learn it from the fact that an obligatory ola needs shlamim va'olas chova gufa ba'ikra, and olas chova itself needs a pasuk, and that would have been this pasuk. So maybe this brisa could have accord with Beis Hillel. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ishna mishalmei David lo gamri." Why does Beis Hillel not learn out from voluntary shlamim shekein mitzuyit? They happen all the time. So they wouldn't learn something from something that's so common may not have the same. So something that's not as common may not need the same requirement. And me'olas chova nami lo gamri, and they Beis Hillel also couldn't learn the obligation from an obligatory ola shekain kolol, because it gets completely burned up from on the mizbeach. So Ella asked him. So meaning because the korban ola is completely burned up, it has special halachos that don't apply to a shlamim. So just because, just a halacha for that required for an ola can't necessarily be used to learn shlamim from. So the Gemara says Ella asked me beinaya. So you have to learn it from in between. So the way I understand this, and I think I saw someone who said it, but right now I'm not sure who, is that it's called, one of the type of limud is called a binyan av, which I don't know if it means a father building, but the way a binyan av is that we try to learn it halacha from halacha A from halacha B, but then we ask a question. Halacha B has a certain stringency, so it shouldn't apply to halacha A. So then we said, so let's try to learn halacha A from halacha C. There's a different halacha that we could learn it from. But then we say, well, halacha C has a certain stringency, so we can't necessarily learn A from C. So the Gemara says, okay, so now we'll learn A from a combination of B and C. So we'll learn it from B. You asked, this has a certain stringency, so we shouldn't be able to learn from it. Well, halacha C doesn't have that stringency, and it has this halacha, so we can learn A from C. And then the Gemara says, but halacha C has a certain stringency that halacha A doesn't have, so you shouldn't be able to learn A from it. So you say, well, B doesn't have that stringency. So from a combination of halacha B and halacha C, we can learn out halacha A. So from a combination of a voluntary shlamim and obligatory olas, we could learn that Beis Hillel learns that you need smicha, and they don't need this pasuk. And then so they do need this pasuk, possibly. So this halacha, that brisa could have followed Beis Hillel. The Savri Beis Shami Shlamei Chava Labo Smicha. The Beis Shami hold that obligatory korban shlamim don't need smicha. So some of the korbanos we were mentioning last week about the Shalmei Chagiga, the celebratory korban shlamim that you bring because it's yantif, that's a korban shlamim. You get to eat from it, as opposed to the olas re'iyah. Just for showing up, for making your appearance in Yerushalayim for the regal, you bring an ola. That's a bird offering. So you don't get to eat from that. But the shlamim is also a type of korban. So the Beis Shammai really hold that you don't need to do smicha on an obligatory shlamim. Oh, so when you go for yantif, you have to bring one of those shlamim. Many shlamims are just voluntary shlamims. But the Shalmei Chagiga, the one that you bring when you come to Yerushalayim for yantif, that's an obligatory shlamim. So the Beis Shammai really hold that an obligatory shlamim doesn't need smicha. But we learned in the Beitza. Rabbi Yossi says, Beis Shami Beis Hillel smicha asma shetzarach. Beis Shami Beis Hillel don't argue that they both agree that you need to do smicha on the animal before you bring it for the shlamim. Amen. So what's machlokas in our Mishnah about? I'll take it l'smicha shchita. Does smicha have to be immediately before shchita? Shebei Shammai omrim eino tzarech. Beis Shammai holds smicha doesn't have to be immediately before shechita, so therefore you're allowed to do smicha on erev yantif and then shechted the next day on yantif. Beis Hillel omrim tzarich, and Beis Hillel says that smicha leaning on the animal and shechita have to be right after each other, so therefore it's impossible to do smicha before yantif. You have no choice except to do smicha on yantif itself. But according to this, Beis Shammai hold that there is smicha, and according to Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba, you don't need smicha. So the Gemara says, "Huda Amar Ki Aitana." So it's true from that brisa. There's no proof to what Rabbi Yitzchak said that Beis Shammai holds that you don't need smicha. But there's a different brisa, and Rabbi Yitzchak follows him. The Tanakh learned in a different brisa. I'm Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda said. Now I don't know how important this is. Our brisa happens to be Rabbi Yossi. This brisa happens to be Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Lo nechleku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel take of smicha shchita shetzarich. Beis Shammai Beis Hillel both agree that smicha must be done immediately before shchita. Ama nechleku, what are they arguing about? Al hasmicha atzma. If you need to have smicha, shebeis Shammai omrim eno tzarich, ubeis Hillel omrim tzarich. That in our Mishnah, Beis Shammai hold that you don't need to do smicha at all on a korban shlamim, even if it's obligatory, and Beis Hillel holds you do. But when smicha is required, Beis Shammai agrees that it has to be done immediately before the shechita. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. There was an incident. Hillel Azaken brought a korban ola to the azara, to the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, to bring it as a korban, to do smicha and offer it on yantif. Chaver love Talmid Shammai Azaken. So Talmidim of Shammai gathered around him. Amr Lov, they said to him, why are you bringing this animal? Amr Lahem, it's a female, and I brought it as a korban shlamim, because he knew that Beis Shammai held that you could bring a shlamim on yantif, because you could eat, because people eat from a shlamim, so you could do the malachos because it's for human consumption, but a korban ola that people don't eat for, you're not allowed to bring. So really, the animal was a male, and Rashi says that he didn't tell them the truth because of Hillel's great anava, his great humility. He distorted the truth to keep the shalom. So there's from other Gemaras we know how big of an anav Hillel was. The person who had a big bet, that someone said, "Oh, Hillel won't get angry. He's very patient." He says, "I'll make Hillel angry," and he waited till Hillel was in the bathhouse for getting ready for Shabbos, and he started screaming, "Where's Hillel? Where's Hillel?" without any respect. And then he asked them insulting questions. One of them was, "Why do Babylonians have round heads?" Hillel was born in Bava, so why do they have egg-shaped heads? So, and he was making fun of it. You have you're a cone head, whatever. So he said that the midwives aren't so good. So that's why it happened. And then he waited till Hill was back in the bathhouse, and then again screaming and then asking, why do people from Africa have thick eyelids or something like that? So he said, "Oh, to block the dust when there's dust storms." He's asking Irish type questions and not showing any respect. And Hillel kept asking, and then the guy finally said, "I've lost a lot of money because of you. They said I couldn't get you angry, and I thought I could." So Hillel was a big anav. He was a big anav. As a very side point, Hillel was the Nasi. Whether he was the Nasi at this time or not, I don't know. My guess is yes. But this would be a small proof against Das Torah. Because how could you argue if the Nasi says you could bring it? Why would Talmidim of Shammai have the chutzpah to argue on him? It's Das Torah. So the proof is there's no Das Torah. But also there is a. But Danny has no problem with that. There's an important chapter. It's nothing to do with Danny. Yeah. In one of these books by Rabbi Daniel Z. Feldman from YU and from TNAC, So in this book, The Right and the Good, Halach and Human Relations, chapter, well, I don't know what chapter, page 73, a chapter starts, lying for the sake of peace. So we're not supposed to lie, but there's certain times where you don't have to tell the truth because you'll keep shalom. So Hillel, according to Rashi, Hillel didn't tell the truth. He didn't want to have a machlokas. So to keep the peace, he told them that it was a shlamim, even though it wasn't going to be a shlamim. Kish kesh lahem biznava, and he was shaking its tail, I guess, to cover up so they wouldn't see that it was a male. V'halchu lahem, and they went away. V'osa yom gavra yadam shel Beis Shami Beis Hillel, and that day Beis Shammai was able to be stronger than Beis Hillel. So in a different case, this seems to mean that the halacha was done by taking votes. So, there were a few times where Beis Shammai, students of Shammai, happened to be the majority that day. So because they were the majority, they started trying to bring up all these shilas and voting, and the halacha would be established according to Beis Shammai because Talmidim of Shammai were in the majority. So they tried, in this case, they tried to establish the halacha. So when it says when to govern that they were stronger, it meant that there were more of them, so they had enough votes that day to make the psak like that. But one thing I didn't realize before, though, I don't know that they actually would have established halachas on Yantif. According to this, it was Yantif, and according to this, though, they would have met in the Beis Medrash and voted to pass it on issues. So that's a little bit interesting, also. Okay. So they wanted to establish the halacha like them that you're not allowed to bring an ola on Yantif. There was an elderly person there who was a student of Shammai Azaken. Ubava ben Buta Shmo. His name was Bava ben Buta. So I came to realize at some point, and I've mentioned this before, in Pirkei Avos, in the first parak, we were talking about early Tanaim, right? Mishiar Knesses Agdola. But what's interesting, up until Shammai and Hillel, none of them have the title Rabbi. So according to the way the Rambam mentions it, that there were, so it happens to be the machlokus about could you do smicha on Yantif was, according to the Rambam, the very first big machlokas that was going on generation after generation, except I think Shmai and Naftalion didn't agree. It's a Mishnah Chagiga, Perik Beis, Mishnah Beis. But other than that, there were no machloksim. They were able to always darshan drashos the same way and have a consensus. But then the persecutions were so bad that the Talmidim of Shammai and Hillel, that's when a split happened, and that's when machloksim started happening. Because they were so much danger to their lives and stuff going on, they couldn't, according to the Rambam, master the skills of making drashos properly so that there'd be unanimous halachas anymore. So it could be that's, I mean, obviously there was smicha before and after that, but when after that time of Hillel and Shammai, it seems people had smicha, then they got a title Rabbi. Not to say that the people before them weren't. Hillel was a Nasi, Shammai was on Beis. Antigone Isocho and Shimon ben Shatach and Shmai and Naftalion, these people we talk about, they were definitely leaders of the generation. But it seems that the title Rabbi wasn't used until the generation of Talmidim of Shammai and Hillel. And it could be, from what we're seeing here, that Bava ben Buta was maybe he was one of the earlier Talmidim of Shammai. So he's not called Rabbi Bava ben Buta. The Bava ben Buta was also lived in the time of King Herod, when Herod was killing. So there's also a problem. Herod was not a fan of Torah, and he killed lots of Chachamim. And Bava ben Buta, who hid, and in order to not be killed, he ended up advising Herod that you can't really do tshuva for what you did, but you should renovate the Beis Hamikdash. And the Gemara in the beginning of Bava Basra talks about it. So Bava Ben Buta was a big chacham. And I'm just pointing out that he's not Rabbi Bava Ben Buta, not because there's anything wrong with him, because he probably was from that generation where he was on the cusp of people having the title Rabbi or not. He was a Talmud of Shammai, the Gemara says right here. Ubava Ben Buta Shmo Shahayu Desh Halacha Beis Hillel, and he knew that the halacha was like Beis Hillel. So if he was Hamishah, why did he know? According to the Rambam, he did master the drush. Even though he learned by Shammai. I mean, not that Shammai was teaching a deficient way. Chas v'shalom. I don't mean that at all. I don't want to even the fact that it could have been interpreted that as I said it wrong. But even though he was a Talmud of Shammai, he knew the halacha was like like Hillel. Vishalach. As we turn to Chafam Beis, the Hevi Koltzon, so he sent instructions to someone. The Hevi Koltzon Kedosh B'Yushalayim. They brought high quality sheep. I don't know exactly what Kedar means, but Rashi says they were the very high quality. Into the Vamidim Bazar and stood them in the Azar. Amar Kol Misha Rotzelisavach Yavav Yismach. Whoever wants to lean on them, come and lean on them. Va'osa Yom Garva Yadon Shal Beis Hillel. And on that day, Beis Hillel had the upper hand. V'kava Alacha Kamosan. And they established the halacha like that. So then there was no argument. So from this thing, if it all happened on the same day, how come first Beis Shammai had the majority and then Beis Hillel had the majority? It doesn't really make sense. But I mean, I don't understand exactly if we're talking about more than one day or if we're literally on that day. I don't think they would have, if it was on a Yantif day, they would suddenly say, "Oh, bring all the animals in." It seems to be that this was not all on the same day. But Bava Ben Buta, even though he was a Talmud of Shammai, he helped establish the halacha that everyone knew. He publicized it like this, so everyone knew that the halacha was Beis Hillel, and therefore the Talmid of Beis Shammai never argued on it again, or didn't argue on it again. Tosfos brings an interesting point, and there seems to be a machlokas between different Bali Tosfos about it. Tosfos says, and it's actually in this week's parsha, or partially in this week's parsha, Nachremos, we can't bring, there's two of it. One is you can't bring a korban outside the Beis Hamikdash, and the other thing, you can't bring a chulin, regular stuff, into the Beis Hamikdash. So because Bava Ben Buta wasn't bringing all these karbanos, but he instructed just bring these animals into the Azara. So since they weren't going to be karbanos, Tosfos asked here, it's a problem of chulin Azara. You're bringing regular stuff that's not going to be a korban into the Azara. How can you do that? So Tosfos here gives an answer that he didn't have them brought into the Azara. He only had them brought to Har Habayis. In Tosfos and Psachim, and Tosfos, I think, in another place, there's alternate answers. One answer is that the Ezras, it couldn't be brought into the Ezras Kohanim, but the Ezras Yisrael, it was allowed to be brought into. And then a different Tosfos mentions something else, is that you're not allowed, when it's Chulin Lazara, means you can't do a korban related action on something that's not a korban. Let's say Bikurim get brought into the Beis Hamikdash and the Kohen picks it up and waves it around. If you were bringing something that was not Bikurim, but you brought the food and you wave it around, that would be Chulin Lazara. But to bring an animal that you're not shachting and you're not pretending to do anything about it, as a korban, you didn't do anything korban related to the animal, so it's not a problem. And Tosfos brings a Tosefta, I think, that they would bring regular food to eat with, like the lechem apanim or something. No, the lechem apanim they don't usually eat inside, but something that because you're just like the korban Pesach, we eat it ala sova. You don't eat the korban Pesach when you're hungry. You eat it for dessert. You ate other korbanos first, and that's the last thing. There's some other food that the Kohanim ate last, so they brought regular chulin food in and ate that first and ate that korban last. So from that, Tosfos says that you are allowed to bring food if you're not doing anything korban related to it. But again, the fact that, but going back to what I said the point before, did Bava Ben Buta send all these sheep on Yantif? It must have been on Yantif, because the point was, whoever wanted to do smicha, come and do smicha. If it wasn't Yantif, what was the significance of that? I mean, he could teach the halacha, but it seems that it must have been an yantif. Okay. Okay, Shuv Maisa, two dots, and we're on 20b1, the second paragraph. Shuv Maisa, there was another case. B'talmid Achad, Mitamida Beis Hillel, Shehevi Olosol Azar Lismachaleh. A Talmud of Beis Hillel brought his korban ola to the Azara to do smicha and yantif. Mitzvah Talmud Achad Mitamida Beis Shammai. One Talmud of Beis Shammai saw him there. Amar Lo. So the student of Beis Shammai said, Mazu smicha. What's the smicha you're about to do? My Rabbi says you can't do it. So Amar Lo, he said to him, Mazu shtika. What kind of silence is this? So shtakvo benazifa v'halach lo. He quieted him with this rebuke, and he left. Amar Abaye said so. He didn't have the anivos of Hillel to not have any argument. He did give him a sharp rebuke, but the Gemara's Abaye is about to teach us something else about this rebuke. Amar Abaye says Hilka Chaytzover Merbana da Amar Lechavri Milsa, a student of the Chachamim, who his colleague tells him something that he shouldn't have. Well, you can't respond to him more or stronger than what was originally said. Because the Talmud of Shammai said, "What's the smicha you're doing?" So he used the same words. He just changed the word. He said, "What's this quiet?" He said, "You should have been quiet." So the message was, "You should just be quiet because you know that that's not the halacha." But he didn't tell him anything more. So the same framework of the text that he improperly did something with, he just threw that back in his face, but not more. So even though he didn't have the anav of Hillel, which is difficult to have, Abaye is saying, it seems to be saying that there was a discipline with which this Talmud of Beis Hillel acted. He didn't overly see nowadays. If something happened, people would put up those big signs all over Mea Shearim and stuff. So that's a reaction more than what the original thing was. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa. Armelhem Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, Talmidim of Hillel told Talmidim Beis Shammai, according to Rashi, says that that they're about to use a kavachomer. And what in a place where it's forbidden for a regular person to do. Mutter legavoa, it's mutter for in the Beis Hamikdash, and this means we're not allowed to cook anything on the Beis on Shabbos, but yet we're allowed to bring a korban in the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos. So the only korbanos we're allowed to bring are the ones that Shabbos is their day, the korban tamid and the korban musaf. So even though we're not allowed to do any of that stuff for us, we're allowed to do it for the Beis Hamikdash. Makom shemuter lahedrot enodin shemuter ligvoa. If it's something where it's mutter for a hedrot to do, we're allowed to cook food for ourselves on Yantif. Enodin shemuter ligvoa. Wouldn't it be certainly mutter to do that in the Beis Hamikdash? So if we're allowed to bring a korban shlamim on Yantif, what would be the problem with bringing even a korban ola on Yantif? If you could bring a korban ola in the Beis Hamikdash when we're not allowed to even cook anything, you should certainly be allowed to bring a korban ola in the Beis Hamikdash when on a day that you are allowed to bring other korbanos and we're allowed to cook for ourselves. Beis Shammai rejected this. Nedarim nedavos, but voluntary korbanos disprove your point. You're allowed to cook food for yourself, but you're not allowed to bring a voluntary korban to the Beis Hamikdash, even though you're going to be eating part of it. Beis Hillel, so Beis Hillel responded to them and said, "Your question is no question. There's no set time for them. How can you compare that to the burnt offering of the Re'iyah being appearing in Yerushalayim for Yantif, for being Olol Regel, that has a set time? So that must be brought even on Yantif. Amr lahem Beis Shammai said, no, Avzu ein kavul lazman. This doesn't have a time either. The Tanan, and I'll bring you a Mishnah to show that there is no set time. The Olas Re'iyah doesn't have to be brought today on Yantif. If someone didn't bring the Korban Chagiga, which is this burnt offering, on the first day of Yantif, he can bring the Chagiga the entire Yantif, Yom Tov Rachman Shachag, and even on Shmini Atzeres. So Beis Shammai is saying, since it doesn't have a set time, it doesn't have to be brought today. You have a few more days to bring it. It doesn't push off Shabbos. It can't be brought on Shabbos. Amar lahem Beis Hillel, Avzu kavol azman. Beis Hillel says, no, this does have a set time. Ditnan, because we learned in the Mishnah, Avar haragav lo chag, einu chayav b'achar yuso. If the regal passed and he didn't bring the korban, he is no longer responsible to bring the korban. Meaning, the time is up, and it can't be brought anymore. So since there is a deadline that it has to be brought by, it's considered that it has a set time. Amr lahem Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai again is trying to ruin Beis Hillel's explanation. V'alokvar namar lachem v'lo l'kva'ah. A pasuk says that you're allowed to cook for you, and the drasha is for you, but not for the Beis Hamikdash. So you shouldn't be allowed to bring a korban olah. Mela, a korban shlamim that people eat from, so that's would be permitted under the halacha of lachem. You're allowed to cook for your you do. So again, that's in Parsh. We read it's in Bo. We read in Parshas Shabbos Hachodesh that malacha can be done for you. So that's what the whole Beitza Masachas Beitza is about. Which malachos are you allowed to do on Yantif? So stuff related to for people's eating, not all malachos, but stuff related to eating. And we mentioned earlier, and we'll mention it again when we get there, I think in the fourth parak or the fifth parak, that we're not going to let you harvest, though there is a machlokas if it's only midirais or midirabana, you can't harvest the wheat, and you shouldn't grind it, but you already have flour, you're allowed to make a dough and knead it and bake it on Yantif to have the fresh bread. So you can't do every malacha, but stuff to prepare food today you're allowed to do. But for you, lachem, but not for the Beis Hamikdash. So we have a different drasha that would not allow you to bring a korban olah on Yantif, other than the required olahs of the community. So Beis Hillel says, "V'lo kvar nemer l'Hashem." It says that you bring a korban chagiga for Hashem. So, kol del Hashem, anything, even if it's for Hashem, is allowed to be brought on Yantif. Im kein matam lachem. So it's true. So now, according to what I'm telling you, we Talmid Beis Hillel, you brought a pasuk that says lachem and not for the Beis Hamikdash, and we're saying there's a pasuk l'Hashem. You could bring a chagiga for Hashem. So now there's a conflict between our pasuk and your pasuk. But we'll explain that there's no contradiction. So lachem v'lo l'kusin. You could cook for yourselves, but not for non-Jews. Lachem v'lo l'klavim, for yourself, but not your dogs. And it's not chas v'shalom. It's not comparing non-Jews to dogs, but it's saying you're not allowed to cook for non-Jews, but they're people, they could take care of yourselves. But your domesticated pets, like a dog, they're dependent on you. So you might think you might be allowed to cook for a dog. So the halacha is no, you can't cook for your dog either. But it's not chas v'shalom equating non-Jews with dogs. It's not at all what this Gemara is saying. The Tosfos points out that on Yud Beis Amud Aleph, that Beis Hillel, we did have a drush according to Beis Hillel of lachem and not as a korban. Okay, let's go back to the Gemara. Okay. Abishal Amr B'Lashon Acher. We're in the second column of 20b2. So this machlokas between Beis Shami Beis Hillel, that Beis Hillel is giving a drasha and reasons why you are allowed to bring an Ola and Yantif, Abishal had a slightly different version of it. So the original argument of Beis Hillel was on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do any cooking for yourself, yet we're allowed to bring a korban in the Beis Hamikdash. On days that we are allowed to cook for ourselves, we should certainly be allowed to bring korbanos in the Beis Hamikdash. That was the argument. So but Abishal has a slightly different version. On Shabbos, your oven is closed. You can't cook anything on it. Yet you're allowed to cook on the Beis Hamikdash or roast, whatever, on the mizbeach in an open fire. For your master is open, you're allowed to bring a korban on yantif. B'makom shekiras psucha, ein odin shekiras rabcha psucha. On the day that your oven is open, you're allowed to cook on yantif. Certainly, your master's oven should also be open. V'chein bedin, and it's a true halacha. Also, you shouldn't be allowed to have your oven full while your master's oven is empty. But my kamiflagi, what's the difference between the first machlokas and here about we're not allowed to cook on Shabbos, but we're allowed to bring a korban on Shabbos versus this, that your oven is empty versus Hashem's oven is open on Shabbos? What's the difference? Mar savar nedarim nedavos kreivin b'yom tov. According to the opinion we just read, Abishal, you are allowed to bring voluntary korbanos on Yantif. Mar savar ain't kreivin b'yom tov. Whereas according to the first argument we had, that doesn't allow voluntary korbanos. It only allows korban related korbanos. Now we just explained it according to Rashi. Tosfos doesn't think that the word, even though the word kira is oven, he doesn't think in this context kira means oven. In Malachim Aleph, there's vayachar lahem kira gedola. Excuse me, in Malachim Beis, it's talking about Elisha, and since they made a very big meal, vayachar lahem kira gedola means they made a big meal. So I guess obviously on Shabbos we eat, but you're not allowed to make. I guess Tosfos means you're not allowed to make the food on Yanta on Shabbos. Yet we make the food. We offer korban on Shabbos, but on Yantif, when we're allowed to set a big meal up for ourselves and cook it all and do all the preparations for it on Yantif, you should certainly be able to make and offer korbanos in the Beis Hamikdash on Yantif, even a korban ola. Okay, Rav Huna says, according to the opinion that voluntary korbanos are not allowed to be brought on Yantif. We don't say that midiraisa they could be brought, and it's only rabbinically that you're not allowed to. And it's Xera that if we didn't allow you to bring them on Yantif, you might never bring them. You might delay and not bring them at all. So in order that doesn't happen, we don't let you bring it on this day. Now, there's a similar svara for this in regard to haircuts on Chol HaMoed. And Gemara Moed Katan says that you're not allowed to get a haircut on Chol HaMoed because if you were, people they would end up not getting their haircuts before Yantif started. So Chachamim said you can't get a haircut on Chol HaMoed to make sure that people got their haircut before Yantif. So it's a similar svara here that they said you can't bring your korban on Yantif because you'll say, oh, I didn't get to Yerushalayim early enough. I'll just wait till Yantif to bring it then. No, we're trying to make sure that you do it early. Perhaps there's a different halacha, more well-known one probably, and that's it's less comparable, but theoretically, I think the Rabbeinu Yonah paskins this way, that you could say Kriya Shema all night long. But the Chachamim says, no, you have to say it by midnight, because if you don't say it by midnight, you're going to say, oh, I have more time to say it, and then you're going to end up missing the Zman. So Rav Huna says, you may have thought that the prohibition against bringing korbanos on Yantif is only rabbinic. because people might delay and not bring it earlier. But he's saying no, it's really a diaraisa problem. You can't even bring it on a midiraisa level. The two loaves of bread that are an obligation today. These are talking about the two challahs that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash on Shavuos. They're an obligation of Shavuos day, and there's no reason that you might delay it because you can't bring it erev Shavuos. Yet baking them does not push off Shabbos or Yom Tov. So we see that 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 bring that korbanos can't be brought on Shabbos. Excuse me, on Yom Tov, even on a diaraisa level. The Rashi says that the Gemara in Menachos, I think they did in Daf Yomi last week, that baking these breads, these loaves, don't push off Shabbos or Yom Tov, and it's not similar to a chagiga. That the zman of chagiga is on the regel, and you can't bring it earlier either. So that's the argument that Rav Huna is saying that midiraisa you're not allowed to bring it on Yom Tov. They asked the question. According to the opinion that voluntary karbanos cannot be brought on Yom Tov, avar v'shachat man. What if you did? So Rashi says the question is, do you sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach? I think we're going to see in a few lines that since it was brought as a korban, you sprinkle the blood, but your obligation wasn't fulfilled. Meaning you pledged a korban, you brought it in the wrong time, so it didn't count towards your obligation. But it wasn't a wasted korban. You're allowed to sprinkle the blood in the mizbeach. That's the main part of a korban, sprinkling the blood. So Rabbi Amar you are allowed to sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach in order to allow the meat to be eaten. Meaning, because it's yantif, so even though you shouldn't have brought the korban, but it ends up that the act of shechting won't be for naught if you eat something. So we shechted in order that it allows it to be eaten to make the action not such a bad action. Does that make sense? Rabbi bar Rav Huna Amar Zerek Etzadam Amanas Lahaktir Murim La'erev. We sprinkle the blood in order that we could bring the parts of the korban that get burnt on the mizbeach, they could be brought on the evening after Yom Tov is over. Ma beinayu. So what's the halachic difference between these two opinions? Ika beinayu nidma basar osha avad. If the meat became tame or was lost, the Rava Lozark, according to the first opinion, you're not allowed to throw it, to sprinkle it. The sprinkling would only be allowed to eat it. Once the meat already became tame, because again, at this point, the blood is in a container, and it's away from the meat. So somehow, before they actually sprinkled the blood on the mizbeach, the meat became tame, or the meat got it disappeared. Someone took it away for some reason. So according to Rava, so since the meat is not allowed to be eaten, just like truma that's tame can't be eaten, korbanos are even stricter. If a korban became tame, it can't be eaten. So since this can't be eaten, there's no reason to sprinkle it anymore. Rabbi bar Huna Zarek. According to Rabbi bar Huna, even though this meat is gone, but the innards and stuff that would be brought on on the mizbeach that night after Yom Tov is over, that could still be offered on the mizbeach. So in that case, you would, even though the meat that would be eaten by people is tame or isn't there, so it can't be eaten, but still we do have pieces of the animal that we burn on the mizbeach that night, so you would sprinkle the blood. Meisave, they asked against Rabbi Bar Huna, who says that as long as you can that the purpose of doing zrik is that you could burn the certain parts on the mizbeach. Kiv seyat seres sheshachtan shlo lishman. So on Shavuos, when we brought the two loaves of bread, which you just mentioned, there were several animal karbanos that were brought with them, and we're going to read them about it not this Shabbos but next Shabbos in Parshas Emor. So the sheep of Shavuos, if you shechted them not for the sake of their mitzvah, or you shechted them in the wrong time, whether too early or too late, you shechted them before Shavuos started. They have to be shechted on Yantif itself, or too late. Hadam yizarek v'basar yachal. The blood can be sprinkled, and the flesh can be eaten. The meat can be eaten. V'im isa v'im haisa Shabbos. But if it was Shabbos and they shechted it with the wrong intent or at the wrong time, lo yizrak, they're not allowed to sprinkle the blood. V'im zarak, and if they sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach, hortza. So the word hortza is from the word rotza, meaning Hashem accepts it. Almanas lahaktir murim almanas lahaktir varim la'erev. And you're not allowed to burn the extra the pieces that get burnt on the mizbeach today, but you could burn it at night. So the Gemara says imzarak. So the second part was on Shabbos, imzarak, if you sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach, the evidin. If that means it was b'diavad, after the fact already you did. The chadchila, no, but before the fact it said, oh, we shafted it improperly. If they would have asked, should we sprinkle the blood? The answer is no, you shouldn't shaft it because we can't eat the meat anyway. So bishlam ala ravanicha. So it makes sense according to Rabbi that who allows us, if you brought a neder or nedava on yantif, you could shaft the blood in order to eat it. We make sense. You sprinkle it as long as you could eat it. And in this case, the kivsei atzeres, the sheep for Shavuos, if it already got sprinkled, you could eat it. Elul Rabbi Rav Huna kasha, but according to Rav Huna, it's difficult. He says that you're still not allowed to put the imurim on the pieces of the animal on the mizbeach that day. So according to him, the fact that we want to be able to put those pieces of the animal on the mizbeach isn't enough for us to lechatchila say you should sprinkle the blood. So the Gemara says kasha. You're right. That brisa is very difficult to Rav Huna's opinion. Now, sometimes the Gemara says kasha, and sometimes the Gemara says it's a tiyufta. It completely refutes. So when the Gemara says tiyufta, so there's problem is that sometimes there's a kasha on the thing, and the Gemara says that it's a kasha, and yet the Rif, I think it's the Rif, paskins like it. So they say is that if it's a kasha, it's not irrefutable. It's very difficult, but it doesn't mean that the shita is uprooted. If it's a tiyufta, then the shita is uprooted. So here, so even though the Gemara says this is a difficult opinion, it then gives an explanation so that it's not so difficult. Or I can answer Shani Shavuos Shabbos Mishvus Yantiv. A rabbinic stringency on Shabbos is different than a rabbinic stringency on Yantiv. And it's true on Shabbos. If it was sprinkled, we don't let you pour offer those karbanos, burn those karbanos on the mizbeach. But on Yantif, we would lechatchila. So they're stricter on Shabbos than they are on Yantif. So what he had said, his opinion in regard to Shabbos, in regard to Yantif, we tried to ask on him from something about Shabbos, but it's apples and oranges. That the rabbinic prohibition against it on Yantif is not as strict as one on Shabbos. So it's true that the brisa on Shabbos doesn't fit with his opinion, but then again, he didn't say it about Shabbos, he only said it about Yantif. We'll leave it here.